what I want you to do is the first thing that we're going to have to do is we're going to have to create a component called an async route. So create a new component inside of JS. And don't get me wrong, other people have written libraries that will do this for you. But I wanted to show you that there's nothing scary here. You can do this all yourself. So create a component called async route.jsx inside of your JS directory. Make it a flow component. Import React from React. And also you're going to need component. And we're going to import spinner as well because we're going to want a nice little loading spinner from /spinner. Okay, and then we're going to have class async route extends component. And then at the bottom, you're going to have to export default async route. OK, so this is the first higher order component that we're going to write. So async route itself, I guess, can render its own markup because sometimes it'll render spinner for us, but it's actually capturing a behavior, right? What it's going to do is when it's rendered, it's going to go out and fetch the component that you asked for, and then only after that it's fetched it that it's going to render itself. Does that make sense? Cool. So it's going to take two things in, two props. It's going to take the props that you want to pass to the component, and then the second thing it's going to take is a loading promise, right? So let's take a look what that looks like. And it's also going to have a state of whether or not it's loaded, right? So by default, it's not going to be loaded, right? Then we're going to have props in here, which is going to take in two different props. One's going to be mixed. So we don't know or care what are in the props, right? We're just going to take the props that they give us and pass it down to the component. So props is going to be mixed. That's what we're kind of asserting there. And then loading promise is going to be of type promise, right? But with promises, you actually have to give it what the promise is going to return, right? Do you remember how we did parameters with types? So it's going to give us back an object, and the default parameter inside of this object is going to be a React component, right? So it's going to be a class of React component, react.component. And then let's not get too far into the weeds about how React is typed, but React has three different props that you pass to React components. We're not going to validate what those are because we don't know what kind of React components it's going to be. So you're just going to say star, comma, star, comma, star. I believe this is default props, props, and state are the parameters there. I usually don't care, right? So suffice to say, just believe me that this is OK. Cool? Cool. Oops, that needs to be on the other side. No? No, I guess that.
You need one of each, don't you?
Yeah, I think I need that. There we go. So I realize this is kind of a lot right here, so let's just talk about it one more time. This is a promise, right? A loading promise is a promise. What that promise returns when it resolves is an object, right? Inside of that object, this is what's going to come back from Webpack when it loads your code asynchronously. It's going to be an object with a default property on it, right? And that default property is going to be a class, like this sort of class, right? And the type of class that it is a React component, right? And React components can be typed in various ways that we're going to ignore for now. That's what the stars mean. It means I don't care what they are, right? I don't care what type of React component it is. I just know that it's going to be something that React can render. Good? Cool? All right. So something that we could do, we could store the component here in state. This is a bad idea. The reason why this is a bad idea is, if you remember, React, when it's doing its diffing algorithm, is going to be checking everything inside of your state. A React component has a lot of stuff on it, and we don't actually want React to be going through that every single time it does a re-render. So a good way to kind of sidestep that is just to say, I'm going to put component on the class itself. If the component lives on the class itself, or anything lives on the class itself, React doesn't check that. So its diffing algorithm is not going to put its tendrils in there, right? Which we don't want it to. So that's why we're going to put it on the class and not necessarily in state. Does that make sense? Only keep things in state that have to do with re-renders, right? If I change the loaded from true to false, I need a re-render right there. Component is never going to force a re-render, right? We're going to load the component once and then not do anything more with it. So it's good to put that on just the class itself. Okay? Now, between these two, I need to create a component did mount. As soon as this component is mounted to the DOM, we want to go and start requesting, or sorry, we actually want to be acting upon this promise that we're going to get from props, right? So what we're going to say right here is this.props.loading promise. And we're going to say .then. It's going to take in a module that Webpack is going to give us. And then we're going to say this.component equals module.default. Then at that point, we're going to say this.setState loaded is true. Okay? So it's going to be passed in a promise. When that promise resolves, it's going to get that module from Webpack, right? This can happen immediately, right? If I go from details to search, then back to details, details is still going to be in Webpack's cache, and it's just going to immediately resolve that promise for me. But this will still work in either scenario. So this.component is going to be equal to module.default, right? We know that that's going to come back because we created that type right here. So that's why that plays nicely with flow. And then once that's been loaded, we're going to set loaded to true. Okay? Last thing we need to do here is create the render function. And it's just going to be if this dot state dot loaded. So if I'm loaded, then I want you to return this dot component, and then I want to just pass whatever props into that. This dot props dot props. I know this looks weird, right? But we have a props called props, right? So that's what you end up with. Okay? If I don't have state being loaded yet, what I'm going to return is spinner. I'm going to return some sort of loading UI, right? In this case, we're just going to put the big spinner on the page. And that's it. Any questions about this? So now we have this async route component that we can use inside of our router so that it's only going to load components when they're needed.